Hi, everyone. Welcome to Noodling with the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. My name is Tracy Winter. I am one of the co-founders of Neurodiversity Coaching Academy, and with me is my co-founder, Kate Arms. Say hi, Kate. Hi. And we are happy to be joined this morning with Kristen Hecht, and she is going to talk about some things that interest her, and we'll all have a great conversation. So, Kristen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Thank you, Kate. So my name is Kristen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Kristen Hecht LLC, which is a boutique consulting firm that offers consulting, coaching, and training services. And I've been working in the social impact sector for about 15 years, helping people connect who they are to their life purpose, and then pursuing careers and lives that are fulfilling and also make a difference in the world and in society. So one of the roles that I hold is I work with college students. I work with a variety of nonprofits, NGOs, and universities. And I've noticed that students towards the end of the semester find themselves in fairly stressful or overwhelming places between finals and papers being written. And so when Kate and Tracy, when you guys presented this opportunity to have a Q&A, I thought I'd really like to learn a little more about how can we more effectively navigate moments of stress and overwhelm, and what's the relationship with those topics and our executive functioning skills. So maybe that leads us to my first question that I have, which is, what are executive functioning skills?
Tracy, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Sure. So executive functioning skills are the things that help us actually like move through the world and make decisions and accomplish things, to put it really, really mildly. They are centered mostly in the prefrontal cortex of our brain, which is sort of the front part that other kinds of animals don't have. And the way that I've heard it described is sort of like an orchestra conductor. So like your brain is all these different kinds, has all these instruments going, right? And oftentimes, especially for some PhDers like me, like it's a cacophony in there of just all the instruments playing at once, right? Without a conductor, they're all going to do whatever they want to do. And the executive function is the thing that comes in and sort of organizes everything harmoniously so that the right things play at the right time, and we move through and get things done. Have that motivational piece. You prioritize. Emotional regulation is also a part of this. So being able to effectively, say, here's what I'm feeling, and here's how I want to respond in that way, but like managing that so it's not just a reaction. All of those kinds of things are part of that. I think Russell Barkley has 8, but that's too many for me to remember. So I remember the general concept. So that's a quick overview of executive function. Kate, what would you add to that?
I mean, I think that putting it sort of through the coaching lens, I would say that of executive function is it's partly the part of the brain that's able to sort of come up with the values and purpose. Like you talked about sort of purpose and like, what is it? And actually identifying what will be the really valuable ways to go. But even more importantly, it's the part of the brain that helps us act in alignment with that assessment.
That's beautiful. And I love that metaphor of the orchestra. I was a band kid myself. I played saxophone in jazz band and marching band. And so I can definitely relate to that, like all the noises and how to make sense of them in your brain.
Well, and let me just repeat that is somebody else's metaphor. If I knew who it was, I would credit them. I don't remember. So I'm not taking credit for that awesome metaphor. I'm just repeating it.
Yeah. And Kate, you mentioned that it's these skills help us to connect to our purpose, to our values, like make sense of things. What else are they important for? Maybe in like a day-to-day life.
I mean, that's a really sort of interesting question, because for me, I look at everything now through that lens of alignment with vision and purpose. But it's things like, do I choose right now to do the dishes or work on my paper. And you know, where am I getting food? When am I going to, like, is the dining hall open? Thinking of the student context, is the dining hall open when I'm hungry? If not, what do I do to make sure that I do have food when I'm hungry? Those kinds of decisions, they all require executive functioning.
Let me add too, it's not only the things that are explicit conscious decisions like that, it's things like brushing your teeth in the morning and taking a shower. And like, those are all actually little decisions. They may have become routine, but for some of my clients that I've had, like, that's something we work on, is brushing your teeth twice a day. Like that was goal one for one of my clients. And she started doing it and it was great. And also like, that's where we were in her executive function was, she knew it was the right thing to do. She knew she needed to do it. She knew it was the healthy thing to do, and also wasn't doing it. So that bit of executive function, we got on track.
Yeah.
It can be as simple as brushing your teeth, or as complicated as, how do I approach this project?
Yeah, so you're leading us now into a direction of like, how do we develop these skills? Like you mentioned routines, but what are some other ways that folks can develop their executive functioning skills?
But I think that there are sort of two real directions. One is the things that need to be habitual. The things like brushing our teeth that we want to be habitual, putting our keys in the same place, which is a thing that I'm still working on, to be perfectly honest.
I've got that one down, but only because I have a penguin statue that has a tray and his name is Sterling. And so like, I'm excited to put my keys on Sterling's tray when I come in.
Right. And I have a pretty
Butler.
bowl for the same purpose. And when I come in rushed and the kids distract me, if the first thing that happens is the kid says something, the bowl gets missed. But those sorts of things, finding ways to create a habit is really, really powerful, because executive functioning that's not habit takes a lot of energy. And so the first set of skills is the things that really need to happen the same way all the time, finding ways to build habits. And then the other set of skills is the things that vary, that making a habit actually is a problem, where it's too rigid for the circumstances, or the circumstances are changing all of the time. That is a different kind of functioning, because that requires mental habits of questioning, and what are the questions that I ask myself to decide what to do. It's also a kind of routine. It's just a very different kind of routine, because it's about the, like, what questions do I ask myself as I'm deciding. Tracy, you want to add to that?
Well, so I have a couple things based off what you said, and I've got one other thing. So, I said the thing about the penguin in jest, but I'm just thinking about using a bowl. I might not use the bowl. The bowl's not fun. My penguin has a top hat and a monocle and white gloves and a bow tie, and like, he makes me happy. He delights me every time I put my keys on there. So like, that fun, that novelty, that like little bit of joy that's giving me a little dopamine boost, and I'm getting a dopamine boost because I'm doing the thing I said I was going to do, which was put the keys on the penguin. But it being my penguin butler, that's part of why I do it, I think. So I
would say I went shopping for a long time to find a bowl that it delighted me to have in the space there, right? So I think actually this is a very, very valuable thing to note when it comes to developing these kind of executive function skills, is that if we can find fun and playful ways of doing them and reinforcing them, it absolutely helps.
Yeah. And then thinking about the things that could become habitual versus the things you ask questions about. And I'm thinking about students, Kristen, because I'm also a coach for the Door Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. And so I have students in one of my second semester freshmen this term. Like, one of the things that has, that the freshmen often come up against is having to make these decisions of, when do I get up? When do I do my laundry? No one's going to yell at me if I don't brush my teeth. Like, those basic things no longer have the structure they had when your mom was getting you out of bed or whatever. So that's like a big place for executive functioning to need to develop there, or for them to come up with their own ways. One way to deal with executive function too, because some of us, especially ADHDers, but other neurodivergent folks too, have trouble with executive function. Like that's one of the hallmarks really in some ways. And so one of the challenges is that we try to keep all of that stuff in our working memory. So we're making those decisions over and over and over again. Every morning, do I brush my teeth, right? And some alternatives to that, and I credit Casey Dixon for this idea, who really like, it's one of those ideas that once you say it, you're like, well, yeah, but until somebody says it, like, it's genius. But externalize all the things, you know? So I know folks who have morning cards who say, like, here's what I do in the morning in order. These are the things. And then I don't have to decide. I don't have to remember. So I don't have to like make sure I'm following my habit. And I don't have to decide. I have a card. I do the things. I get to check them off. Maybe it's laminated, whatever. And then that takes away, that's not developing the executive function, but that's putting some scaffolding around executive function for those of us who have a hard time developing it, because some of our brains are not made to have great executive function. That doesn't mean we can't improve, but it does mean having some other supports could be useful. So externalizing some of those decisions can be really helpful.
Yeah. In addition to what you've already shared, are there any other ways that executive functioning shows up in people who are neurodivergent?
I mean, I think one of the things that is actually quite common is that executive functioning struggles are very common in a variety of different neurodivergent patterns. And one of those is because, as Tracy said, the executive functioning lives in our prefrontal cortex. And you talked about stress a little bit, and stress and executive functioning have a very clear relationship, because if stress moves into overwhelm, our brains shift into our threat response system, because that's where overwhelm lives. And when the cortisol that comes in with that threat system is in our brains, it takes us out of the pathways that lead to the prefrontal cortex. It bypasses that directly to motor function and digestive function, and it shuts down all of the conscious thinking and decision making and the digestion, and just takes us into action. And so one of the ways that developing executive function is really important for people with various neurodivergences is those challenges that you have because your brain doesn't sort of fit neatly into the system, add stress, which increases the likelihood that you're going to function out of the threat assessment part of your brain, which doesn't access the executive function. And so an enormous part of work that I work with on people is actually trying to reduce that stress response in the face of the challenges, so that there can be creative problem solving in those moments and actually have access to executive function.
Yeah, Kate makes a good point. It's almost a double whammy, because like some of us are, our brains are not set up to have great executive function in the first place, and we've got challenges around that. But also as part of that, as part of being neurodivergent, we are in a world that isn't necessarily made for us. So we are continually problem solving. We are continually finding ways to make things work. And that's stressful. Like that alone ups the stress, and so and can shift us into overwhelm. So I think that was a great connection to make. The one thing, and I already said it, but the one thing that I would emphasize that doesn't get looked at, I think, enough is the emotional regulation part. People think of executive function as sort of like, the conductor, or I've heard it, being the secretary, right? The get things done thing. And also, when we are in threat response, our emotions are winning the day sometimes too. When we don't have enough executive function, we have deeper reactions, we have deeper feelings and deeper reactions to them. So we look like we are out of proportion to the stimulus that's happening, even though I would argue that I'm exactly in proportion for my brain. Right. So like, it depends on whose scale you're using. Right. But that can be a thing that we need to work on in order to, again, get back in the world, right? In order to get what we need from the people that we need to get it from. I deal with this a lot with folks in the workplace, right? They respond very, very quickly, they react very, very quickly, and they don't get what their idea doesn't come across because the emotion is off-putting to some people that are in the room, right? So it's like, okay, how, like, what's the motivation for you to notice the emotion, regulate it? Maybe you have to go scream into a pillow after the meeting, but for now, how do you get your idea heard, right? So that emotional regulation piece is one that people don't always recognize if they're not sort of like immersed in this like we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
students
a
too,
lot of
their
our,
brains aren't all the way formed, right? At 18 years old, 19 years old, their brains aren't even all the way formed. So in terms of regulating stuff, it's harder. Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, one of the things that I work with in this space quite a lot is a lot of our myths about emotional regulation are actually about using energy to repress emotion. So it actually can make the stress worse. And so skillful work with emotions is another piece of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it might have sounded like I was talking about repressing, and that's definitely not what I meant. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. So since we were talking a bit there about stress and overwhelm, let's pretend I'm a student and it's the end of getting towards the end of the spring semester and I'm about to graduate. So I've got some papers due, maybe a test, and that's stressing me out, but it seems kind of manageable because I'm expecting that. That's common at the end of every semester. And then I've got the big life question of what am I doing after graduation? Where am I going to live? All these big questions. So, like, how would you describe the difference between stress and overwhelm and how it might impact me in terms of my executive functioning?
You want to dive in, Tracy?
Sure, I'll start and then Kate will make it more nuanced because she is around the subject. Yeah, so the easiest way I think about it is stress is something that is not comfortable. It's raising certain hormones in your body, like cortisol, like he was saying. And it can be useful because it can actually move you toward the thing. So stress is, and it's variable, like it shouldn't be there all the time, right? Like you're stressed and there are times when you're unstressed, theoretically. It's also like, I think of it as more situational. Stress comes up, stress goes down. I'm told stress goes down. I'm like waiting for that to happen, but I'm told that's what's supposed to happen. Somebody could let me know when on the schedule I can expect that. That'd be great. And overwhelm is sort of like stress for too long, stress for too big, right? And at that point, it's no longer manageable. It's no longer like moving you into getting the things done. It's no longer, being a helpful thing. Not comfortable, mind you, but at least it would be moving you. Overwhelm is when it's you like the things that happen when you're overwhelmed are paralysis, are low motivation, are like the things that are counter to getting the things done. So yeah, like Kate and I had a whole bunch to do this past weekend, and we ended up sort of like WhatsApp co-working. And that helped me because I get really overwhelmed easily when I've got a huge list of tasks. I just want to check out. But because like I knew Kate was counting on me, and because we were kind of doing it together and keeping in touch, that helped me manage the overwhelm and make it stress rather than something that made me so I couldn't do those tasks. Yeah. Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of really important distinctions in there that you got a handle on really nicely. I come as a meditation teacher from a tradition that talks about 3 feeling tones for emotions. And I think that that's a really, really useful distinction here. And it's positive, neutral, and so pleasant, neutral, and unpleasant. And when we have neutralness, we actually don't do anything. So when Tracy's talking about stress being important to do things, when we have a neutral thing, we have a tendency to, our bodies tend to be like, okay, we'll just sort of conserve energy and wait for something that we need to do. If we have an unpleasant sensation, our bodies get into action to get out of that situation. And if we have a pleasant sensation, our bodies get into action to have more of that. And it's a very simplistic breakdown, but if we think about it that simply, it becomes really clear that that little bit of stress is the stimulation we need to get into action one way or another. If you are a person who never feels hunger, you need something external to tell you to eat because you don't have that inner unpleasant sensation. So you need that in order to get going. One of the things that happens with people with strong emotions, and this is one of the things that happens with ADHD, that's that big drive, is that impulse to get out of an unpleasant situation or towards a pleasant situation, which is particularly prevalent in ADHDers, is that like, okay, there's a pleasant thing over there. I am there without a pause to think about whether that's actually a good idea. If it takes you past it's a good idea, then it starts to get into be the sort of bad levels of stress because it's pushing you past where you want to be going. Overwhelm is a really different phenomenon in the nervous system. It's when therapists talk about trauma and they talk about a flop or freeze response, that paralysis that Tracy was talking about is what happens. And this is actually the body's assessment that I can't win by moving, I can't resolve the stress by moving forward or away. And so maybe I'm going to just see what happens if I freeze. And then there's another level of overwhelm that we see happen. If that's not if that doesn't solve it, the problem doesn't go away, then we get into fawning and people pleasing and real submissive behavior and that sort of thing, to sort of like, what do I need to do to make the pain go away? And so overwhelm is really that freeze place. It's really that place of my body has decided I can't win.
What I'm hearing too is the balance in all of these places, right? Like just enough stress. It's really Goldilocksing the whole thing, right? Just enough stress, not too little, or you don't move, which when you talked about the hunger, it made me think of all of us who are on ADHD medication, who often don't feel hunger while we're on our meds and then forget to eat. And then like 9 o'clock at night when they wear off, we're like, oh, okay, I'm going to eat all the things. But also things like when you're talking about the freeze reaction or the fawn reaction, like a break is an okay thing, a time to not do it. And like I mentioned, one of the motivators for me was not letting Kate down. So, you could call that people pleasing. I call it living up to my commitments, and I call it responsibilities to my colleague and friend. But that's because it's more in balance, right? Than people pleasing or fawning, which is more of putting myself, below what the other person needs, as opposed to being in equal partnership. So like there's a balancing part of all of these things, I think. That when you tip over, that's when you end up in overwhelm or burnout. Before that, it's like just moving you toward because the freeze response, when your body decides I can't win, like when my list is too long, I just go, it doesn't matter how much I do, it won't be like I can't get close to done, I'm not doing it. And I'm out. Suddenly I am playing New York Times spelling bee and crossword puzzle and other such games, which at least stimulate my brain a little bit, but like certainly are not what I need to be doing at the time.
Yeah.
What's a question? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, you mentioned the big life question about like, what do I do after graduation piece?
Yeah.
Existential questions very frequently bring up that huge piece and can be really, really overwhelming. And I think that this is really important for us to think about culturally right now, because I actually think that one of the reasons that so many people are getting adult diagnoses of various conditions is actually that as a planet, we're undergoing a lot of existential crisis right now. And so I actually think that the pure existential, like, what do I do with my world stuff is very, very prevalent everywhere. And I think it's really powerful for us as coaches to know how much values and purpose serve as resolution of existential angst.
Yeah.
And as pieces of executive function. Like I do a lot of values work with my clients in part because intrinsic motivation or just executive function working is something they don't have going. So values can be a motivator. If we can tie or reframe an unpleasant task to, well, if I don't do this, then I'm crossing this value, or if I do this, I am living out my value. Then the thing gets done. In addition to it, but that's an existential thing. That's sort of tying doing your laundry to my purpose in the world. Right?
Yeah. So let's say I am currently managing one of these existential questions and I'm finding myself in a state of overwhelm. You've alluded throughout our conversation to a few questions, tools, approaches. And I've also had the firsthand advantage of being able to sit through your master classes. So I know that you do have this 3-step method, but what would be an approach that you would recommend I use to grapple with whatever it is that's overwhelming me?
We have a 3-step approach. I didn't know we were that organized.
It's the overwhelmed self, competent self.
Got it. Thank you. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, how linear of us. We didn't know we could do that.
Yeah, the first thing is just to notice that you're in a state of overwhelm. If you actually have enough wherewithal to notice that you are in a state of overwhelm, that observer self is your biggest ally through all this. That sort of sense of spaciousness that I am not my overwhelm is a really powerful place to start. And the thing I like to sort of say about that is that is actually a cultivatable awareness that you can actually practice having that experience. And that is often what we do in coaching is if someone's overwhelmed is actually sort of to notice, okay, that is overwhelming. And also you're more than that. And there are a bunch of tools for that. And one I would just offer because it's super useful is if you are not currently overwhelmed and you can draw a picture or a scribble or something that is like not art, but like a representation of your overwhelmed self, or describe or tell a story about your overwhelmed self, you can start to separate consciously that. I'm clearly able to talk about the overwhelmed self, like it's different. Because that starts to build that piece. And then you get to sort of go, oh, when I'm competent, who am I? What am I doing? What would I do? And then what do I need to do to choose that piece of what of how I want to be in the world? Tracy, do you want to take it from there?
Well, I think a really important part of what Kate just said was doing it when you're not overwhelmed. Like to me, any of these things that you want to change how things are in the moment, the place to start is in reflection. So that's when you're not in it, but practicing that on the regular. So your brain gets used to thinking about its thinking. So your brain gets used to observing itself and noticing whatever, right? And doing it in reflection means you're in a safe space now. It's not actually happening, but you're training your brain into that. And after you do that for a while, you'll notice that you can notice it in the moment. You can't necessarily change anything about it yet. You can notice. And so like my version of that is that I think to myself, here it comes. Oh, I'm doing the thing again. I'm saying the thing again. Darn it, I said the thing again.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing that that's happening instead of like 2 hours later going, right?
Yeah.
And after, you do that enough and you're able to change your behavior in the moment. You're able to go, I'm doing the thing. I want to make a different choice. Here's what I'm going to choose because you've done the work that Kate was talking about. When you're not actually, you don't, if you want to be a swimmer, you don't start in the Olympics, right? You start moving from the shallow end of the pool to the deep end of the pool. So that's what we're talking about here is like, if you try to do it, not until you're within overwhelm, totally in freeze, like everything's awful. That's going to be a much harder ask of yourself than if you've been practicing. And this is part of why reflection is so important in self-development and in helping ourselves self-regulate and self-manage.
Yeah. Yeah, so noticing and self-reflection. I loved also, Kate, what you shared about that reminder that I am not my overwhelm. I'm more than this. Those are really powerful reminders.
Yeah. I'm thinking a lot about this context of like students who are about to graduate and thinking about one of the ways that we do a disservice to children is we ask them what they want to be when they grow up. Like somehow they're supposed to know. Like,
Like we're supposed to know just
like we're
because we're
supposed to know.
theoretically
Like,
grown
I don't know
up.
what I want to be when I grow up. Have I
I'm
grown
working
up?
on
I'm
it.
tall.
I'm
She's tall. You don't know it. She's tall. She's like 6 feet tall.
Oh wow, yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
secrets of
Literally, I grew
Zoom.
up, but yeah, right. We're all 3/4 of a screen
Yeah.
high on Zoom. But we ask children from very, very young ages, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they sense that like I have to decide what I want to be young. It can be really overwhelming.
Mhm.
And then we ask high schoolers, and depending on where you are, sometimes like so where I am, the high school curriculum is actually very much structured so people are pushed into vocational directions in like 10th grade. They're like 15 and making vocational direction choices, which is overwhelming to people because they don't know what they don't know, but they know that they
Yeah.
don't know.
Hmm.
Or anything. So they
Yeah.
know that they don't know
Yeah.
enough to make this decision. And then, but even if you are in a place where you go through a process, like I went through in high school and college, where I didn't actually have to make a decision. I didn't even make a decision about what I majored in college because I was able to take advantage of a program that let me be that wishy-washy. But the discipline,
Wishy-washy. Just saying. Sorry.
yeah.
Interrupted you.
But that piece of, okay, I'm graduating. What do I do with the rest of my life?
Mhm.
It's such a pervasive sort of, the graduation speech that's like, go out and be awesome and like, go out and do.
Mhm.
And in fact, we can pivot at any time.
Mhm.
So part of the thing to remember is I'm not actually choosing what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm choosing what kinds of jobs I'm applying for today. Am I applying for graduate school today?
Mhm.
And that reminder that this is not a once and for all decision is really, really powerful in terms of reducing that level of overwhelm. And
Mhm.
sometimes it requires actually sort of going, okay, so I go in this direction and I don't like it, and actually thinking ahead, how would I pivot if I was unhappy? How would I know if I was unhappy? What criteria would I use for, oh, I'm going to stick with this for another couple of years because I'm just not very good at it, or I'm going to actually make a more radical shift.
Mhm.
And that's another place where when someone is in overwhelm and they can't see it for themselves, to have someone like a coach or a parent or a grandmother or a mentor in the professional world or a guidance counselor or somebody who's on the outside who's not in the overwhelm to sort of go, okay, this is a decision for today. What do you want to do today?
Mhm. Yeah, there's that today element of it, but the today isn't necessarily going to be who you are 50 years from now or 5 years from now. It's who are you today. I love that it doesn't give so much pressure, or hopefully it like kind of lessens that pressure, gives some air to it.
I'm a big fan of asking what's next instead of what do I do for my whole life? What's next? I mean, like neither Kate nor I graduated college thinking, you know what I'm going to do one day? I am going to open a neurodiversity coaching school to help people learn how to coach folks who have, neurotypes that are different from, like, of course we didn't know this was a thing. It even wasn't a thing when we graduated, So you have to be also flexible enough to take advantage of what comes along and to follow your interest and to follow your curiosity. And I say this especially with some of my neurodivergent clients, especially my ADHDers, because for them, like making one choice means not choosing all of these things, and that's just suffocating. Like the idea that I have to close off all these possibilities. So even in my sessions, I don't say, what's the most important thing you want to talk about? Or I say, what do you want to talk about right now? Where do you want to go first? Leaving open the possibility for whatever else there is. And so like, especially with my students, I actually am a little more concerned about my students who are very firm freshman year in exactly what they want to do for their whole life, which sometimes works out for people. Don't get me wrong. Like, that's awesome. If that's your path and that works, congratulations. And I'm a little envious. And the ones who are like, I'm thinking about economics, but I'm also thinking about medical school, but I'm also thinking about, an art studio. And I'm like, all right, let's talk about this. Like, how do you want to move around in this space? So yeah, I think what do you want to be when you grow up? Just the very to be verb that's in that, not what kind of work do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be happy and curious and interested and getting surprised all the time. Like, I want to be lots of things. I also get to be a coach, and my work is as a coach. And also, like, that's not all of who I am, just like Overwhelm is not all of who you are. So, those are my, like, I think that was not especially coherent, but it was my random responses to what Katie were saying.
From what both of you have shared, it sounds like these are resourcing tools where you're like reaching out to folks who aren't currently in that same overwhelm with you, a coach, a counselor, mentor, etc. You're looking at things in the nowness, not the daunting long-termness. Are there any other types of resourcing that you would offer?
I think this is a line, but the flip side of looking only at the now, sometimes the now, like when we're talking about the looking to-do list and things, is overwhelmed, right? And what I end up looking at is, nope, that's the same thing. Sorry, I was working this out of the talk. I'm just thinking of, like, there are times that I call my sister and I'm so in the now of what has to happen in the next 6 hours, and the list is this long and there's just no way. And she reminds me of the long term. She reminds me of what you've done before. I'm so excited for you about where you're going. This is a step on the way. You do the best that you can, and your best is always is really good most of the time, right? And so, like, and I do that for her. So there's the flip version of that taking the bigger perspective actually helps settle the overwhelm. But it's really hard for me to do that for myself. So having trusted people, like, I kind of think of it as, in those moments, my brain actually isn't trustworthy to judge how things are. Like, I'm in that threat response. I'm not going to make the best judgment. So I have a couple of my sister and my best friend, like, that's who I trust to have a brain that is better for me at that point, to know better than I do at that point. But it's a short list of people. But there's the recognition first. Hey, my brain's not totally working optimally at the moment by a long shot. Whose brain is working better for me? Okay, I'm going to trust what they have to say more than what I have to say for now. That's like a flip version, I think, maybe, of it. I don't know. What's that bringing up for y'all, if anything?
I think it's great. I think that spaciousness of, like, and somebody else who's not in it is really powerful. I was sort of thinking about, what if I'm just surrounded by people who are in it? Like, what is it that we can actually do for each other when we're all in it together? And I think that there are two things. And I think that one is something that college students tend to be really good at, which is taking a break and doing something different. Going and doing something that takes you out of that space, some kind of just distancing from it yourself. And we have a tendency in the parts of North America that I have spent most of my time for that to be a little bit too much alcohol supported. And that takes the stress level down, but it doesn't put the cognitive functioning back in place. But the playfulness, like, go out and sing karaoke with your buddies, like, the playfulness, that gets your cognitive functioning back online. So some discernment about what you do with your break can be really, really powerful. The other thing is a sense that we're all in this together. So like we're all in this place of trying to figure out, and we're all a little lost together, but at least we're in it together. That sense of compassion and shared experience can also lower the stress levels and help you get back to a place where you can actually do some problem solving from a rational thinking place.
Yeah.
That's where I was going to go, is community. We haven't, like, we talked about this in terms of dealing with it yourself or having one person, but like he was saying, that we're all in this together of it all, right? So for students, simple things like that are study groups.
Yeah.
Right? Like when we're all figuring it out together, it's not as bad. And usually there's one or two people in there who know what they're doing. So they can kind of like help everybody else figure it out. There's a smidge ahead. I went in undergrad, I was in a residential college at Michigan State called James Madison College. And all of the freshmen lived in one dorm. And all of the freshmen took one class the same all year, which was colloquial called policy, but it was supposed to be called Introduction to Public Affairs. And the first 2/3 of the first semester was on political theory and constitutional democracy. Like we had to come to the first class having read Federalist Paper number 10 and a few other things. And so exam time, the whole dorm was studying. Like you could go into any of the classrooms on the 3rd floor, which is where we had our classes, and find people studying different versions of this. And so like that community feel, like we're really all in this together. 250 of us are taking this exam at the same time in the same room. We're all studying the same thing. We all have the same goals. Like that was a really different experience than some of my other classes at Michigan State, which is a huge university, and didn't necessarily have that community built in. So like that piece I think is important and can't really be overstated. We think because overwhelm and things we've been dealing with, they can feel really lonely. You can feel like you're the only one. That, and so when you're with people who are having some of those same experiences and sharing them and having the vulnerability to share what's going on, like that's hard to have that vulnerability. And also it pays off when you're with trusted people.
Yeah.
I'm just watching the time and we have a few minutes left. What's left on the table, Kristen, that you want to make sure that we hit on before we have to say goodbye?
Well, I really feel like we've covered all the key topics that I was hoping to get to today. And what I'm sitting with from this conversation is it's reminders of I am not my overwhelm, and finding opportunities to find spaciousness, to incorporate play, finding structures that resonate with me. So that's what I'm taking away from this conversation. And I was wondering, from maybe as a last question, what would be a final takeaway that you might offer that we haven't said, or something we have that you want to reinforce or underscore for those listening or watching this video?
So the place that I was going to go before Tracy reminded us that we were end of time, I think I do actually want to go with a lot of us are in cultures that don't recognize eldership particularly well, particularly sort of the way that tech is pulled up and is such a like evolving thing and is so prevalent around the world and is such a like young person's coolness thing. That eldership is something that we don't honor enough. And the reason that elders are wise is that this sense of disorientation that college students have as they're leaving and graduating, it's such a wonderful time of life, but also a metaphor for every time something comes up and we have to sort of make a real shift about who we are and how we are engaged in the world. And we're not very good at rites of passage in the modern Western world. The first time you hit it, it is overwhelming. And it is very, very hard to navigate. But if you hit it once when you leave high school and go to college, and once when you go from college to your first job or graduate school, and once when you have your first serious relationship, and then once when you have your first serious relationship end, and then once when you leave jobs again, and once where you have a great boss and they leave, and once when you get married, and once when you have kids, and once when you get divorced, by the time you get to like 85, you actually know what this process of figuring out what your next move is, to a point that you don't, it's not that you don't go through the disorientation, it's just you have faith that you're going to get through it. And there's an ability to have ease and comfort and compassion for it without getting lost in it. And so I would sort of make a plug for eldership and looking up to like getting that comfort from the people who've been through these kinds of transitions before. Yes, they're different. Yes, it wasn't AI, you know, it might have been World War II, it might have been Korea. Like it's different. And also, we have a planet full of people who have actually know how to go through these and come out the other side.
Love that. First of all, like I'm now thinking of my grandmother who was almost 97 when she died, and was advising me on my dissertation like 2 months before she died. Like she's amazing. Thank you. The thing that I'm highlighting, Kristen, is something out of what you just said, actually, which is we've been talking for over 45 minutes now about all these different ways to do this and all these different things you can do, and et cetera, et cetera. And also, don't listen to us. Like find the way that works for you. That's what we do with our clients, is we go, yeah, there's all these tried and true things, except that they're tried and true for other people, and you've probably already tried them. So they're not so true. So like, what do we have to make up? So instead of taking what we've said as like, here's what I should do, maybe take what we've said and think, what does that spark for me? What does that mean for me? How do I make that work for me? How does that not work for me? Which ones do I throw out? Like all of that is valid. So like, remember, you are the center of it. And we're just talking about stuff we know, but that might not mean that we know you. So what does that spark for you is one of my favorite questions. So thank you, Kristen, so much. And thank you for these great questions and this thoughtfulness and making us think. It's been incredibly fun. Kate, thank you so much for your insight, as always. So brilliant and wise. And I learn from her all the time too.
I'm particularly grateful right now, Kristen, for your ability to sort of listen to us ramble and pull out the nuggets and some structure. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
good call.
Thank you. And a last tiny question for individuals who might be watching this video as a standalone and don't know, what is this octopus behind you, Kate? Is this your element of play?
I mean, this is part of my element of play. I've got the little prince behind me, and I've got the flowers back there, and I've got the octopus, and it's really sort of my, it makes me laugh, it makes me smile. And also I like to have some things in the background that remind the people who are watching me that it doesn't have to all be serious.
I have named the octopus Bernard, but the octopus has not let us know whether he has accepted this name or not.
And Tracy, but you have a penguin. What's the name of your penguin?
The name of my penguin butler is Sterling. This is Seymour. He's a dragon who sits next to me and reminds me to have fun. He's also super soft, super colorful. He is stuffed with lavender, and you can put him in the microwave and make him warm. So like he hits so many of the sensory pieces.
Oh, I need one of those.
He's
This is my dinosaur.
Oh, those poppy things. I love those.
Which I got from the students I work with.
Oh, that's awesome.
It actually is a great bringing it full circle moment. So thank you again, both of you, for today's time and for all your work on this as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming in, for being here with us. And thank all of you for watching. If you want to put your fun octopus, dinosaur, dragon thing in our comments, we would be delighted to see them, because look how delighted we were to see each other's. So please do add that. And otherwise, we will see you again soon.